Hello and welcome to another episode of Coffee with Caprill. I don't know if I ever told you the penalty that I instituted here in the office. It doesn't really apply anymore now because it's just Wes and I. But a couple of offices ago, I had to redo the carpeting because I was spilling coffee everywhere. So I instituted a rule that said, if you ever find me without a lid on my coffee, call me out and I'll give you $100. So even though I don't live by that rule today, one of my a virtual assistant who I've worked with for years sent me this customized one that says "Coffee with Dan Caprill." Anyway, I wanted to get into the fact that I'm about to do a client review, and as I'm preparing, one of the things I take a look at is returns. Now, I don't think returns are meaningful in the short run at all. I know they're not. I know they're absolutely not meaningful. But it's human nature. People want to talk about them. And if they're high, what do I tell people? Don't get used to it. And if they're low, what do I tell people? Don't get used to it, right? Things have a tendency to work out. But it's really interesting this year because you only have to roll the clock back 3-4 months, and I was getting not a lot, but I was getting some calls from people fearful about the impact of the tariffs we're going to have on the economic markets. And then before that, I was getting calls from people highly concerned about the election results and how those would have an impact. And my answer is always the same. Guys, you can't predict this. Any news that's imminent is already factored into the price. So the tariffs, for example, were already factored into the price because we knew they were coming. And usually what we perceive as bad news isn't nearly as bad as our perception is. And very often our perception is motivated by some level of bias. I mean, it's just true. It's who we are as humans. There is no such thing as an objective human. I don't think so. I mean, if you were, you would be so void of emotion, you probably wouldn't be a very pleasant person to be around. There's certain outcomes that we want to have happen, and there's certain outcomes that we fear because in some way it's related to something else that we don't like. Politics is the great example of that. If a Democrat administration came up with the cure for cancer, chances are there would be a lot of people on the Republican side who would try to dismiss that person's involvement. And the opposite is true. Okay, I don't make any bones about my beliefs, but I, one, know that just because I believe it doesn't necessarily make it true. And secondly, I tried my hardest to be very respectful of other people's beliefs. If people believe differently than me, it doesn't make them wrong. It doesn't make them bad. And I hope that we can still be friends. So wasn't that long ago. I'm dealing with a lot of anxiety about what's going to happen with the tariffs. Markets are going to crash, etc. So I'm just looking at some. They're past mid-year. This is 1/1 to 8/17. Now, in this particular portfolio, like most every portfolio we work with, is broken up into various asset classes. So first thing I'm noticing is that the large U.S. stock market is up 10.5% year to date, as defined by the S&P 500. That's 10.5% through not even 8 months. You take that for a year, right? Tariffs kicked in 3 months ago. Let's see. Large value companies, they're up 7.5%. Again, through the first not even 8 months of the year. Wow, let's look at international here. International. Small internationals are up 35%. Emerging market stocks are up 20%. International large value, 31%, which really speaks to my heart because, as I've mentioned before, A lot of times people question me, why do I have international in my portfolio? And I say, because there's going to come a day in time where you're going to be really glad that you did. The U.S. market, the S&P 500, it's kind of like the New York Yankees. I've used that example before. They're usually consistently up there and usually win the competition more than any others. But as we've seen this year in the baseball season, they don't win every year. And you need to have those other players. So think of internationals as the Milwaukee Brewers if you're following baseball. The Brewers simply don't lose. It's incredible. So the lesson here, and it's an old lesson that I've emphasized time and time again, is number one, you don't know what markets are going to do before they do them. No one knows. But secondly, bad news tends to be very short-lived. I just wish that we would enjoy it as much as we allow the bad news to bother us. And we really shouldn't. So this is not by any means a told you so moment, because I had no idea. But I do know that over time markets have a way of working these things out. And short of thermonuclear war, there's probably no bad news that we as a species can't survive. So always cause for optimism. Focus not on the news of the day. Focus on your life. Focus on doing the things that you want to do, because our time, it's limited. So let's make the most of it. Have a great